She stood in the spotlight of the Kodak Theater on the night she won everything. The statuette was cold in her hands, the crowd was on its feet, and for one suspended moment, Kathy Bates held the world exactly where she had always dreamed it would be. 40 years of rejection behind her. One golden night ahead. The applause did not sound like noise. It sounded like vindication. That was 1991. By 2012, she was sitting alone in a different kind of room. No spotlight. No applause. Only the hum of machines, the antiseptic bite of cold air, and a diagnosis that arrived not like a thunderclap, but like a quiet door closing on everything she thought she still had ahead of her. Ovarian cancer. The words landed without ceremony, without warning, without mercy. She had survived that one. Then, in 2003, before the world even knew about the first, breast cancer came. Quiet, precise, devastating. And still, she survived. But survival, as Kathy Bates would learn across the long and brutal decades that followed, is not the same as escape. It is something harder, something that demands more courage than any role she ever played. Because the cameras go dark, the awards shows move on, and what remains is a woman alone with a body that has betrayed her. Not once, not twice, but in ways that compound with time. Swollen limbs, permanent damage, the daily negotiation with a life that looks nothing like the one she imagined standing on that stage in 1991. She is 77 years old now. She still works. She still laughs. She still shows up. But the story behind that laugh, the one the red carpets never captured, the one the tabloids never bothered to print, is not a story of glamour. It is a story of a woman who built her career from the ruins of rejection, who claimed her moment at the absolute top, and who then spent the next 3 decades fighting battles far quieter and far more brutal than anything Hollywood ever asked of her. This is not the story of Kathy Bates, the actress. This is the story of Kathy Bates, the survivor. And it begins not in a hospital, not on a stage, but in a city that did not care whether she lived or disappeared. Memphis, Tennessee. 1948. The city smelled of river water and ambition, and into it arrived Kathleen Doris Bates, third daughter, quiet child, the kind of girl who observed more than she spoke and felt more than anyone around her seemed to notice. Her father was a mechanical engineer. Her mother was a homemaker of strict social sensibilities. The house was orderly. Expectations were clear. And Kathy, from the very beginning, was something her family did not quite have a category for. She was not the pretty one. She was not the graceful one. She was the one who felt everything. That sensitivity, so misunderstood in childhood, became the instrument she would one day play with devastating precision. But that day was a long way off. First came the years that would have broken a lesser person, and very nearly broke her. She arrived in New York in the early 1970s with theater in her chest and almost nothing in her pockets. The city received her the way it receives most dreamers, with complete indifference. She waited tables. She sang in a restaurant on Lower Manhattan, trading her voice for tips, watching the door every night for someone who might see what she carried inside her. No one came. Audition after audition. Rejection after rejection. She was told she was too heavy, too plain, too unglamorous for the kind of roles that made careers. The industry that she had devoted her entire young life to looked at Kathy Bates and saw a supporting player at best, a character actress who would orbit the center of the frame but never command it. She was offered the edges of stories, never the heart. And yet, she did not leave. That refusal, stubborn, almost unreasonable, would become the defining act of her career. While others surrendered to the arithmetic of rejection and went home, Kathy Bates stayed. She built her reputation on stage, in productions that critics admired and audiences found, but that Hollywood largely ignored. She was extraordinary in rooms that held 200 people. The rooms that held 200 million would have to wait. The wait was long, longer than it should have been, longer than her talent warranted. Then came the play that changed everything, and the cruelest possible lesson the industry could have taught her. In 1983, she originated the role of Jessie Cates in Marcia Norman's T.T. Night Mother on Broadway. The performance was by every account extraordinary, a controlled detonation of grief and quiet fury that left audiences shattered. She received a Theatre World Award. The praise was unanimous, and when Hollywood came to adapt the play for the screen in 1986, they looked past the woman who had built the role from nothing and cast someone else. Sissy Spacek got the Oscar nomination. Kathy Bates went back to waiting. There is a particular kind of pain in that, in being the architect of something magnificent and watching someone else receive the keys. It does not announce itself. It settles. It becomes part of the interior architecture of a person. Another layer of quiet that makes the eventual explosion all the more seismic. The explosion came in 1990. Stephen King's Misery arrived on her doorstep at a moment when most of the industry had already filed her under the category of nearly. She was 42 years old, an age at which Hollywood typically begins its long, polite farewell to women who do not fit its narrow definitions. Director Rob Reiner did not see what the industry saw. He saw exactly what Kathy Bates had always been. She played Annie Wilkes with a ferocity so complete, so terrifyingly human, that the screen could barely contain it. On March 25, 1991, she walked to that podium at the Kodak Theater and held the Oscar above her head. 40 years of rejection. One perfect incandescent moment of arrival. She had made it. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that the hardest part had not yet begun. The decade that followed the Oscar should have been the golden one, and in many ways, it was. The roles came differently after Misery, heavier, more complex, carrying the weight of someone the industry had finally decided to take seriously. She brought warmth and wit to Fried Green Tomatoes in 1991, earning an Academy Award nomination that confirmed the first had been no accident. She inhabited Dolores Claiborne in 1995 with the kind of worn, bone-deep authenticity that only someone who had spent decades quietly absorbing life could produce. She was beloved on television, unforgettable in films, a presence whose arrival in any project immediately raised the temperature of everything around her. But the body keeps its own calendar. And Kathy Bates's body had already begun to write its own story, one that had nothing to do with scripts or directors or the particular hunger of an audience waiting to be moved. In 2003, she received her first diagnosis: breast cancer. She did not speak about it publicly for years. That silence was deliberate, not born of shame, but of something more private and more fierce. A conviction that what happened in the room between a person and their own mortality was not content, was not a story to be offered up for consumption, was not something that belonged to anyone but her. In an industry built on exposure, Kathy Bates chose to keep the most terrifying chapter of her life entirely her own. She had a double mastectomy. The surgery was radical, the recovery long, and the emotional weight of what it means for a woman to emerge from that particular procedure, altered, scarred, and expected to return to a world that judges women's bodies with exhausting relentlessness, was something she would only begin to articulate years later, and then only in fragments, carefully chosen, offered like objects from a private room she was not yet ready to fully open. She returned to work. She always returned to work. But something had shifted in the interior landscape of the woman who showed up on set after that surgery. Not her talent. That remained untouched, perhaps even deepened by what she had endured. Something quieter shifted. The relationship between her body and her sense of self. The unconscious assumption most people carry, that the body is an ally, a vessel that can be trusted to carry the spirit from one decade to the next without turning against it. That assumption had been revoked. She knew now what betrayal from the inside felt like. And then, 9 years later, it happened again. In 2012, Kathy Bates received her second diagnosis: ovarian cancer. A different disease, a different surgery. The same cold room, the same language of margins and stages, and treatment protocols delivered by people who were professional and kind, and utterly unable to soften what the words actually meant. She was 64 years old. She had already survived once. She would have to learn how to do it again. Not from the beginning, but from a place more complicated than the beginning. Because surviving a first diagnosis carries, alongside the relief, a particular kind of dread that no one fully prepares you for. The knowledge that the body has already demonstrated its capacity for betrayal, that the word remission is not the same word as safe, that every routine scan, every unexplained ache, every morning that begins with inventory, what hurts today, what is different today, carries the shadow of what has already happened once. She chose to speak this time, not immediately, not in the raw, unprocessed days of diagnosis and treatment, but eventually, with the careful precision of someone who has decided that silence, in this instance, costs others too much. She spoke about ovarian cancer in interviews with the particular authority of a woman who had lived it. Not to perform courage, but because she understood that women were dying of this disease in part because they did not know what to look for, did not have the language for what their bodies were telling them, did not believe that what they were feeling warranted the terrifying act of making the appointment. She wanted them to make the appointment. That was the gift she chose to make of the worst years of her life. Not a monument, not a memoir, a simple, fierce instruction. Pay attention. Go to the doctor. Do not wait. It was not the role she would have chosen. It was the most important one she ever played. Survival has a price that the word itself does not advertise. The world celebrates survivors. It lines the hallways with ribbons and rings bells when treatment ends, and photographs the moment of departure from the hospital with something approaching joy. And the joy is real. The relief is real. But what the photographs do not capture, what the ribbons do not account for, is what comes after. The long, unglamorous, frequently brutal negotiation with a body that has been saved but not restored. A body that carries the evidence of what it survived in ways that do not fade with time, but compound. For Kathy Bates, that price had a specific name: lymphedema. It arrived as a consequence of the surgeries. The removal of lymph nodes during cancer treatment, a necessary intervention that carries an irreversible cost. The lymphatic system, disrupted, can no longer drain fluid from the limbs the way it was designed to. The result is swelling. Chronic, permanent, painful swelling that affects the arms, the hands, the daily architecture of a life that most people navigate without ever thinking about it. Buttoning a shirt, lifting a glass, typing, reaching. The 10,000 gestures that constitute an ordinary day become negotiations, become calculations, become quiet reminders written in the language of sensation that the body has been permanently altered. She spoke about it in 2017 with a directness that surprised people who expected a softer framing. There was no soft framing. She described waking in the night, with arms so swollen she could not find a comfortable position. She described the compression garments that must be worn daily. Not occasionally, not when symptoms flare, but every single day, as a permanent feature of existence, the way other people wear glasses or carry medication. She described the physical therapy sessions, the careful management of temperature and exertion, the vigilance required to prevent the condition from worsening. She described what it means to live in a body that requires this level of constant attention simply to remain functional. And she described something else, the invisibility of it. Lymphedema is not a condition that announces itself with the clarity of a cast or a wheelchair or a visible indicator that communicates to the world that this person is managing something. It is interior. It is concealed beneath sleeves and managed in private and misunderstood even by people who consider themselves well-informed about health. It carries no cultural shorthand. It generates no awareness ribbons of its own. It simply exists, daily and demanding, in the bodies of the people who carry it. She became, almost despite herself, its most prominent public face. Because Kathy Bates did not treat lymphedema as a footnote to her cancer story. She treated it as its own chapter, one that deserved the same honesty, the same specificity, the same refusal to be minimized that she brought to everything else she had endured. She partnered with the Lymphatic Education and Research Network. She gave interviews not to generate sympathy, but to generate awareness, speaking with clinical precision about a condition that affects millions and is understood by very few. But there was another layer beneath the advocacy, a more personal one, because Kathy Bates had spent her entire career fighting the industry's judgment of her body. She had been told she was the wrong size, the wrong shape, the wrong aesthetic for the kind of stardom she pursued anyway. She had built her career in defiance of those verdicts, had claimed her Oscar and her Emmy nominations and her extraordinary body of work in spite of an industry that had repeatedly suggested her body was the problem. And now, her body was asking something new of her. Not the industry's judgment this time. Something more intimate and more relentless. The daily reality of managing a physical condition that affected how she moved, how she slept, how she worked, how she existed in the most basic and fundamental sense. The negotiation was no longer with casting directors and studio executives. It was with herself, with the limits and the pain and the discipline required to keep functioning at the level her standards demanded. She kept working. American Horror Story, across multiple seasons. Disjointed, on Netflix. About Schmidt, Titanic. The roles accumulated, the awards followed, and through all of it, behind all of it, the daily management continued. The compression garments, the therapy, the vigilance. She once said, with the particular economy of someone who has learned not to waste words on what can be communicated more precisely. I have good days, and I have bad days. On the bad days, I remember that I'm still here. Still here. At a cost the audience never sees. In a battle that never ends, with a courage that requires no camera to validate it. Still here. There is a version of Kathy Bates's story that Hollywood knows how to tell. The struggling actress who refused to quit. The late bloomer who claimed her Oscar at 42. The survivor who beat cancer not once but twice and returned to the screen with her talent entirely intact. It is a story of triumph, and it is true, and it is genuinely extraordinary. And it is also, in the way that carefully curated narratives always are, incomplete. Because the version Hollywood does not know how to tell is quieter. It lives in the spaces between the triumphs, in the years between the diagnosis and the recovery, in the mornings that begin not with a call sheet or a costume fitting, but with the slow, private inventory of a body that demands attention before the day is permitted to begin. In the evenings that end not with applause, but with the particular silence of a woman who has given everything to her work, and finds, in the absence of the work, a stillness that is not always peaceful. Kathy Bates never married. She was engaged once, in the 1970s, to actor Tony Campisi. They eventually parted. The relationship that followed years later, a marriage that lasted from 1991 to 1997, ended in divorce. She has spoken about both with a characteristic refusal to perform regret or manufacture resolution. What she has said, in the careful language of someone who has made a genuine peace with something genuinely difficult, is that her life looked different from the one she might have imagined. That the companionship she found most reliably was in the work itself, in the characters, in the particular intimacy of disappearing into someone else's truth for the duration of a production. But characters are not company, and the work, however extraordinary, does not fill every room. She has spoken, in rare and unguarded moments, about the emotional weight of navigating illness without the architecture of a traditional family structure around her, about what it means to receive a diagnosis and return home to a house that holds only yourself, about the particular courage required to manage chronic illness, not as a shared burden, but as a solitary one, making the appointments, tracking the symptoms, maintaining the vigilance, processing the fear, all within the private walls of a life that does not have another person woven into its daily fabric. She did not say these things as complaint. She said them as fact. And in saying them, she offered something more valuable than the triumphant narrative. She offered the texture of an actual life, the reality that survival is not a single event, but a continuous practice. That courage is not dramatic. It is the compression garment worn every morning before anyone is watching. It is the therapy appointment kept even on the days when keeping it requires more energy than the appointment itself will restore. It is the phone call made to the doctor about the symptom that is probably nothing and might not be. Hollywood, meanwhile, continued to do what Hollywood does. The industry that had once told her she was too heavy, too plain, too unglamorous, did not suddenly discover its capacity for nuance simply because she had survived cancer. The roles for women her age, her size, her particular brand of uncompromising specificity remained scarce. The red carpets still measured women against a standard she had never met and never pretended to pursue. The conversations about representation for older women, for women whose bodies told visible stories of survival and time, moved slowly and grudgingly, and only under sustained pressure. She continued to apply that pressure. Not loudly, not with the machinery of a campaign, but through the consistent, deliberate act of showing up, on screen, in interviews, at advocacy events, as exactly who she was. A woman of 77, a cancer survivor twice over, a person managing a chronic condition with the same professionalism she brought to every role. Not minimizing, not performing resilience for an audience that preferred its survivors to be uncomplicated. She was complicated. She had earned every complication. And in a landscape that persistently rewards women for appearing effortless, for making difficulty look decorative, for converting their pain into content that leaves everyone feeling inspired without requiring anyone to feel uncomfortable, Kathy Bates chose something rarer. She chose accuracy. She told the truth about what her life actually cost. And she told it without apology, without performance, and without any apparent interest in being forgiven for having survived imperfectly. That, more than any role she ever played, was the performance of a lifetime. There is a particular kind of stubbornness that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with speeches or declarations or the theatrical gestures that make for compelling highlight reels. It arrives quietly in the repeated decision to return, to show up again, to refuse the comfortable alternative of stepping back, of accepting the industry's implicit suggestion that a certain age, a certain body, a certain accumulation of medical history constitutes a natural ending point. Kathy Bates has never accepted that suggestion. At 77, she is still working, not in the diminished occasional way that the industry tends to offer women of her age and history. The cameo appearances, the prestige projects designed to generate award season conversation before the film is quietly shelved. She is working with the same ferocious commitment she brought to Misery in 1990, the same refusal to treat any role as beneath her full attention, the same insistence that the character on the page deserves every instrument she has spent a lifetime developing. American Horror Story gave her multiple seasons across multiple years. Madame LaLaurie, Iris, Miriam Mead, characters of extraordinary range and darkness that demanded physical and emotional endurance that would challenge performers half her age. She delivered them with a completeness that consistently surprised even people who believed they already knew what she was capable of. Ryan Murphy, who worked with her across those seasons, has said publicly that directing Kathy Bates requires only one instruction: get out of the way. She received an Emmy nomination for her work in the series, then another. The awards, accumulated across a career that spans 5 decades, tell one version of the story. The other version is told by the people who work alongside her, the crew members, the directors, the fellow actors who describe a woman who arrives prepared, who treats every person on set with the same respect, regardless of their position in the hierarchy, who brings the same intensity to the rehearsal that she brings to the take, and who has never, not once, not in 50 years of professional work, phoned it in. That reputation is its own kind of legacy. But the work is not the only thing she brought to her 77th year. She brought weight loss, not the kind manufactured by industry pressure or the particular cruelty of a Hollywood that has always had opinions about her body. The kind that came from a decision made entirely on her own terms for reasons that had nothing to do with anyone else's aesthetic preferences and everything to do with the practical reality of managing a body already navigating lymphedema, the residual effects of cancer treatment, and the compounding physical demands of age. She lost over 60 pounds, and the world, predictably, exhaustingly, had opinions. Some were kind. Many were reductive. A significant portion of the conversation that erupted around her changed appearance revealed, with uncomfortable clarity, how little the discourse around women's bodies had actually evolved from the decades when she was being told she was too heavy for the roles she wanted. The language shifted. The judgment did not. She absorbed it with the particular equanimity of someone who has spent a lifetime being assessed by people who do not have access to the interior of the life they are evaluating. She said it was about health. She meant it. Because for Kathy Bates, the body has never been an aesthetic project. It has been a working instrument, one that has been operated on, diagnosed, managed, and returned to service more times than most people would find survivable. The decision to change its composition was not a capitulation to the industry's preferences. It was a negotiation with the only thing she has ever fully controlled: the terms on which she shows up. She shows up now, at 77, lighter in weight, and immeasurably heavier in what she carries. The history, the survival, the knowledge of what the body can endure and what it cannot, and the hard-won wisdom to know the difference. Still working, still present, still, impossibly, still standing. The woman who was told she was too much has spent a lifetime being exactly enough. And she is not finished yet. In the end, what remains is not the Oscar. It is not the Emmy nominations, not the decades of extraordinary performances, not the critical consensus that she is one of the finest actors her generation produced. Those things exist. They are real. They deserve the weight they carry. But they are not, finally, what her story is about. Her story is about the morning after. The morning after the diagnosis. The morning after the surgery. The morning after the recovery that is never quite complete. That delivers you back to your life in a form slightly different from the one you left in, asking you to build something recognizable from materials that have been permanently altered. The morning that arrives without applause, without cameras, without the validation of an audience that has decided your suffering is sufficiently cinematic to deserve their attention. Kathy Bates has lived thousands of those mornings. She has lived them with compression garments and physical therapy appointments and the daily discipline of managing a body that has earned, through everything it has survived, the right to be treated with patience and precision and an absolute refusal to be ashamed of what it has become. She has lived them alone, in the specific solitude of a woman who built her life around her work and who found, in the long, quiet chapters between the work, that solitude is not tragedy. It is simply a condition, one that, like lymphedema, like survivorship, like the perpetual negotiation with an industry that never quite knew what to do with her, requires management rather than resolution. She has lived them at 77, still working, still showing up, still refusing the comfortable diminishment of a graceful exit. And in all of those mornings, in the accumulated weight of all of that ordinary, invisible courage, she has given the world something more enduring than any single performance. She has given it a template for what it looks like to survive without making survival your identity, for what it looks like to advocate without making advocacy your performance, for what it looks like to age in an industry that fears aging, to carry illness in a culture that prefers its survivors cured and uncomplicated, to occupy a body that the world has always had opinions about, and to proceed with absolute steadiness, as though those opinions are simply not the point. They were never the point. She was always the point. Kathy Bates, at 77, is not a cautionary tale. She is not an inspiration in the hollow, frictionless sense that the word has been drained of meaning by overuse. She is something more specific and more useful than either of those things. She is evidence, evidence that the body can be betrayed and still carry you forward, that the industry can underestimate you for 40 years and still be wrong, that survival is not a destination. It is a daily practice, unglamorous and unwitnessed and more demanding than anything the cameras ever captured. If her story has moved you, if somewhere in these chapters you recognize something of your own quiet battles, your own mornings after, your own stubborn refusal to stop, then carry that forward, not as applause, as action. Go to the doctor. Make the appointment you have been postponing. Have the conversation you have been avoiding. Learn the name of the thing that has no ribbon yet, no campaign, no cultural shorthand, and understand that the absence of visibility does not mean the absence of importance. Kathy Bates taught herself that lesson across 50 years of living it. Now it belongs to you. Before you go, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us, what city are you watching from? Whether you are in New York or Nashville, London or Los Angeles, São Paulo or Sydney, let us know where in the world this story found you today. We read every single one. And tell us something about Kathy Bates. Maybe it was misery that first made you understand what acting could actually do. That cold, precise, terrifying performance that made Annie Wilkes one of the most unforgettable characters in the history of cinema. Maybe it was fried green tomatoes and the warmth she brought to Evelyn Couch, the quiet woman discovering her own fury. Maybe it was Titanic, or Dolores Claiborne, or one of her extraordinary seasons on American Horror Story. Madame LaLaurie, Iris, Miriam Mead, characters so different from each other that it seems impossible one person contains all of them. Or maybe it was something smaller. An interview you saw, a moment in a press junket where she said something honest when everyone else was saying something polished. A line reading in a film you almost did not watch that stopped you completely and made you pay attention. Whatever it was, tell us. Because Kathy Bates has spent 50 years giving everything she had to every room she walked into. The least we can do is give her our words. Leave your city. Leave your favorite role. Leave the moment she made you feel something you were not expecting to feel. And if this story meant something to you today, if it reached something real, share it with someone who needs it. Someone who is in their own mourning after. Someone who needs evidence that it is possible to keep going. This channel exists for stories exactly like hers. Subscribe so you never miss one. We will see you in the next one.